program. Former health secretaries and dozens of medical groups unite to call for transparency, saying they oppose any attempt to cover up alleged irregularities in the spending of COVID-19 response funds. For the seventh straight week, motorists are in for another round of fuel price hikes. Find out how much. And 3 days since Rappler CEO and staunch Duterte critic Maria Ressa won the Nobel Peace Prize, and amid tributes from international leaders and groups, Malacanang finally congratulates her. 5 former health secretaries and more than 40 health professional organizations are calling for truth and transparency regarding the 42 billion peso procurement of personal protective equipment for healthcare workers. President Duterte earlier ordered his cabinet to snub the Senate's investigation into the issue, but the groups say that shouldn't be the case. Our George Niles has that story.
Doctors are now speaking out. They want to get to the bottom of the government's supposed anomalous purchase of personal protective equipment or PPE for healthcare workers in the midst of the pandemic. The Philippine College of Physicians says President Duterte should not obstruct efforts for truth and transparency.
Aayawan ho namin ang anumang tangka na pigilan ng mga testimonya o cover-up ng totoong nangyayari.
Dapat makita rin natin na talagang nagsasabi sila ng buong katotohanan at walang pressure from anywhere.
The Senate Blue Ribbon Committee has been hearing the Health Department's transfer of 42 billion pesos in pandemic response funds to the Procurement Service Office of the Budget Department to buy PPEs, a move which, according to some senators, are questionable. The President has repeatedly said there is no anomaly in the procurement and barred cabinet members from attending the hearing. Reason why healthcare professionals are questioning the motive behind this.
Hindi siya maliit na pera, 42 billion. At napunta po yung deal na yan, yung kontrata, sa isang maliit na kumpanya na 625,000 ang capitalization at kumita ng 8 billion the next year. Hindi ho siya biro-biro.
Yung issue ng overpricing ay kailangang liwanagin at dapat siguro ay maalis lahat ng duda ng mga tao tungkol dito. Hindi lang pwedeng sabihin porque sinabi na there is no overpricing ay naniniwala ang lahat ng tao dito.
The group is also calling on the Senate for a speedy but diligent hearings, so cases may be filed before the Justice Department or the Ombudsman in case pieces of evidence will point to negligence and corruption of some individuals. They are also asking for the public's support in searching for the truth.
We need to move on. Kailangan ho nating magtrabaho and hindi ho tayo makakapagtrabaho, lalong-lalo na po ang DOH kapag itong issue na ito ay hindi masagot.
5 former health secretaries and 45 health professional organizations have signed a statement calling for truth and transparency in the supposed anomalous purchase of PPEs. George Cahides, CNN Philippines.
The Health Department says it respects the opinions and recommendations coming from different sectors. This is in reply to the statement of leaders of medical groups airing their support for the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee's probe into COVID-19 response fund spending. The DOH says it will continue to do its job despite the criticisms, adding that it has always been transparent.
Tuloy-tuloy lang po ang trabaho natin dito sa Department of Health. Nire-respeto ho natin ang malayang pagbibigay ng kanilang opinion sa public. Dito sa amin, sa Department of Health, the national government has always been transparent. Nakapagsumiti na po tayo dito ukol sa issue na ito sa mga kinauukulang ahensya. Investigations are undertaken at iwanan po natin doon at magbibigay po sila ng resulta dito po sa mga investigasyong ginagawa.
President Duterte is not retracting an order barring cabinet officials from attending the Senate inquiry into COVID-19 response fund spending. Malacanang says that the president, the number of hearings should be more than enough for the Senate to get answers. The Senate Blue Ribbon Committee postpones its next hearing, initially scheduled for tomorrow, October 12. It is unclear why. Committee Chairman Richard Gordon earlier said the committee will begin preparing the report on its findings. The Health Department reports almost 8,300 new COVID-19 cases. This is the smallest single-day increase since August 4, when new infections were over 8,100. Active cases are nearly 8,900. New fatalities also relatively low at 36, while recoveries rose by over 300. The updated case tally did not include results from 2 testing laboratories. The independent Octo Research Group sees a steady improvement of the situation in Metro Manila. It says the 7-day average daily cases in the region has dropped below 2,000, the first time since the strictest enhanced community quarantine was enforced here in the region in August.
The trend in the NCR will continue to go down. And we project that by, before the end of October, the NCR could be averaging less than 1,000 cases per day. I mean, this is possible based on the current trajectory. And we could be at, moderate to low risk already by November. And that's what we're seeing, at least in the NCR.
Will alert level 4 in Manila be downgraded soon? The health department is evaluating if the National Capital Region should be placed under a less strict alert level 3 by October 16. Undersecretary Maria Rosario Vergere points out the declining COVID-19 cases, positivity rate, and number of hospital admissions. She added that if this trend continues, the government might ease restrictions by Christmas.
Series of meetings starting today hanggang sa Miyerkules para makapag-present tayo sa IATF. Hindi lang naman yung projections ang kailangan natin tignan. Hindi po ngayon ang panahon para maging complacent tayo. Kahit sinasabi natin na sa Pasko, baka better Christmas na, baka mas marami ng bukas, yan po ang ating hope. Yan ang gusto natin at sana marating natin kung patuloy po nating pag-iigtingin ang mga ginagawa natin ngayon.
The Presidential Advisor for Entrepreneurship also weighs in. Joey Concepcion says the drop in COVID-19 numbers is enough reason to downgrade to alert level 2 or 3 in Metro Manila and allow the reopening of more businesses. Well, preparations are in full swing. 4 days to go until the start of the COVID-19 vaccination for a new age group. After health workers, those with comorbidities, senior citizens, and economic frontliners, select minors will now be up for their anti-COVID-19 shots. Paige Javier has the details.
The government will begin vaccinating select adolescents aged 12 to 17 this Friday.
Tuloy po, nakapagsabi na po ang vaccine cluster, they will start on October 15.
They will receive Pfizer or Moderna doses, the brands given emergency use authorization for minors by local regulators. To be qualified, they must have one of the pre-existing illnesses identified by the Pediatric Infectious Disease Society. The minor, as well as the parent or guardian, must give informed consent and provide a certificate as proof of the comorbidity. The pilot run will be limited to 8 hospitals in Metro Manila. The health department says this will allow monitoring of possible adverse reactions. Makati Medical Center Director Dr. Saturnino Javier says it's all systems go for the initial rollout.
Everything is there already, including emergency response teams and everything. So it's basically just a different group that we will now be dealing with.
Unlike the previous rollout, they will only allow on-site registration to avoid problems with master lists. The rest of the process will be the same. Then inoculation. Javier says unvaccinated companions of minors can also get their shot during the pilot run.
The child cannot naman come here on their own, right? They will really have a companion or caregiver or a parent with them. So if they are not yet vaccinated, we can also vaccinate them so that we expand the reach of the vaccines.
He adds, they have received a good response so far from patients and healthcare workers with children. But for some parents and kids, hesitancy remains an issue.
Nag-iisip pa po ako kasi po 'di ba yung sa Dingbasya. Yun po ang iniisip ko ngayon. Opo, para po ano?
Bakit?
Para po makapagbalik na po kami sa face-to-face class. Tapos po maiwasan po yung pagkalat ng virus.
Parang hindi. Ako nga hindi pa eh. Natatakot sa nababalitaan yung mga nababasa namin na mga pangit na epekto.
Javier reiterates the need to protect minors from COVID-19.
The fear of the side effects should be should be nullified by the concern for the welfare and well-being of our children.
Authorities aim to expand the rollout to hopefully allow minors to go out and return to school. Paige Javier, CNN Philippines.
Coming up on News 9, more country restrictions for vaccinated people. We have the latest from Australia and Singapore. And severe tropical storm Maring continues to drench parts of the country. Details next. We'll be right back.
Oh, anyari sa'yo? Ba't nakasimangot ka? Alam ko na. Masakit ang katawan mo, ano? Sa sobrang trabaho? O di kaya masakit ang ulo sa sobrang stress? Break ka muna. Hinga ng malalim at imasahe ang ulo mo gamit ang Herbalaya Liniment Oil. Ako rin ganun eh. Kaya pag mataas ang tensyon sa trabaho, mag-Herbalaya break ka muna.
Herbalaya Liniment Oil. Amoy na kaaya-aya. Sa bawat pahid ay ginhawa.
For my babies, only vet-approved Nutri-Chunks puppies. The only one with active boost and prebiotics na Pampalisto. Made with real meat with essential nutrients to help them grow strong and healthy. Happiness! Listo, ganado sa Nutri-Chunks puppies.
We're back.
Hell yeah! I take it very, very seriously.
This week on Hollywood Express. F9 is already a record breaker.
It's very humbling to watch them and be able to take advice from them.
A magical reunion is in the works.
Newsnight, where we go above and beyond the headlines to check on the weather. Heavy rains forecast in many parts of the country due to severe tropical storm Maring. Expect heavy to intense with at times torrential rains in Batanes. The same will be felt over the northern portion of Cagayan, the Babuyan Islands, Ilocos Norte, Ilocos Sur, Abra, Apayao, Mountain Province, and Benguet. Maring will bring moderate to heavy with at times intense rains over the rest of Cagayan, Ilocos region, and the Cordillera region, while light to moderate with at times heavy rains forecast in Central Luzon and the rest of Cagayan Valley. Maring was last spotted east-northeast of Apari, Cagayan. Pagasa says it is expected to leave the Philippine landmass tomorrow morning. Now, beginning tomorrow, gasoline prices of Caltex, Clean Fuel, Petrogas, Phoenix Petroleum, and Sea Oil will increase yet again by $1.30. These fuel firms will raise diesel prices by a hefty $1.50 per liter, while Caltex and Sea Oil will impose $1.45 increase per liter of kerosene. This is the 7th straight week of pump price hikes in Metro Manila. Gasoline prices now stand at 50 to 60 pesos. Diesel prices at 45 to 50 pesos and kerosene prices over 50. Other fuel firms have yet to announce their price adjustments. News overseas now. A major city in Australia is reopening its doors after months of strict lockdowns because of the Delta variant. Fully vaccinated residents in Sydney can now go to pubs, gyms, restaurants, and shops. This after the city hit a 70% inoculation rate. Over 5 million residents have been under tight restrictions since June. New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet says if everyone does their part, they can open up even more. Singapore is welcoming more travelers without the need to quarantine. The new rule for fully vaccinated people takes effect on October 19. Visitors from the US and 10 other countries may enter Singapore under the vaccinated travel lanes. Officials say they want to rebuild the country's status as an international aviation hub. Last week, Singapore signed an agreement with South Korea to exempt inoculated travelers from quarantine beginning November 15th. While other countries are easing restrictions on the vaccinated, the U.S. is bent on developing vaccines for children under 5 years old. Former U.S. Food and Drug Administration Chief Scott Gottlieb says vaccines for these children may not come until next year. He explains clinical trials take at least 6 months in the first phase and 2 years in the second. Gottlieb says he's confident studies can be completed by the first quarter of 2022. Now, Taiwan puts its military on full display Sunday in an extraordinary show of defiance towards Beijing. A parade marking the anniversary of the Chinese Revolution allowed Taiwan to showcase some of the island's most advanced and sophisticated weapons. CNN's Will Brookley was at the National Day Parade. He was live from Taipei.
This may not match the massive scale of military parades in mainland China, but for Taiwan, this is an extraordinary sight. 4 kinds of domestically produced missiles rolling through the capital in front of Taiwan's presidential palace, an ominous sign of escalating regional tensions. Taiwan's military has never played a more prominent role, at least in recent history, as it has this year. And while the overall atmosphere is festive, this island is increasingly concerned about the behavior of mainland China. Provocative behavior. More than 100 planes entering Taiwan's self-declared air defense identification zone in just 1 week this month. And with those aerial incursions come new propaganda videos from the Taiwanese Air Force vowing to defend their national sovereignty and the weapons that they plan to use to defend their sovereignty on display here. Taiwan is vowing to up its national spending on defense by billions of dollars. In 2020 alone, reports say that they bought $5 billion in weapons from the United States, including F-16 fighters and Patriot missiles. And they're also developing their own weapons here on the island, increasingly calling on the support of the United States and other democratic regional allies to come to Taiwan's defense. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen spoke in front of the presidential palace, laying out the situation as a fight for the future, not just of Taiwan, but the world.
At this moment, free and democratic countries have been alerted to the expansion of authoritarianism, and Taiwan is on the forefront of the defense line of fellow democracies.
Defending that future comes at a cost. Taiwan is having to up its military spending even as they struggle to get a volunteer military force after phasing out most mandatory conscription here on the island. Will these weapons, will the help of the United States be enough to defend against the threat from an increasingly assertive mainland China as President Xi Jinping vows to, in his words, reunify the mainland with Taiwan? Beijing has long claimed this self-governing island as its own territory for more than 70 years, since the end of China's civil war. Taiwan points out that they've never been ruled by the Communist Party of China, and they say they plan to keep it that way, putting their military on full display here. Will Ripley, CNN, Taiwan.
Filipinos who want to vote in the 2022 elections have 3 more weeks to register. Our Melissa Lopez talks to some of them who endured long lines and bad weather.
Hundreds of Filipinos hoping to vote in the 2022 elections again line up at dawn on day 1 of the extended voter registration period. Lines were still long, with early birds learning from previous failed attempts. At the COMELEC office in Quezon City, people camped out on the street for hours.
12 midnight, nandito na kami. Alas 12 ng gabi.
Nakailang balik na kasi kami, hindi dito pero sa iba-ibang satellite. Nakapag-try na kami mga 5 beses na. Pang-6 na to dati. Mga oras kami dumadating, cut off na agad, ganun.
It took a lot of pressure from Congress for COMELEC to grant the extension, which started Monday and will last until October 30th. That's from Monday to Friday between 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. Over 63 million have registered with the poll body so far, but groups say there are over 70 million Filipinos qualified to cast their ballots come May 9th, if only they sign up as voters. Except for reactivation of the listed voters, which may be done online, new registrants and those transferring districts need to show up personally at their local COMELEC office to submit their papers and biometric data. At this site, only 300 applicants are processed daily. One should bring a pen and a government-issued ID, including a photocopy. Face masks and face shields should be worn at all times. The lines are still long, but it's not as bad as before, considering that only residents of Districts 3 and 5 of Quezon City have to go here. COMELEC says voter registration in malls is still preferred by many for greater convenience. But those who had to wait here had to endure the sun's heat and later sudden rain. Still, many say all the trouble is worth it.
Baka po maging game changer yung boto ko eh. Baka yun yung maging deciding factor. Sayang naman.
Others were determined to register as they already know who to vote for after last week's filing of candidacies.
Nakapili naman na kami. Sabi naman nila, mabilis lang kanina, ngayon lang tumagal, tapos naubos na yung sa kabila, yung dito hindi na gumalaw.
Gusto ko yung gagawa ng tama, yung pipiliin ko yung bago ngayon.
Aspiring voters clamor for change, which they believe can be achieved with each of their votes. Melissa Lopez, CNN Philippines.
Presidential aspirant Senator Bato de la Rosa admits to being a last-minute bet of PDP Laban. He said at 3 in the afternoon on Friday, he got a call from PDP Laban President, Energy Secretary Alfonso Cusi, asking him to file his COCS stamp-bearer. That was 2 hours before the 5 p.m. deadline. De la Rosa said he was surprised, although he really was the party's second choice after Senator Bongo, who's now running for vice president instead. De la Rosa reiterated he will withdraw his presidential bid if Davao City Mayor Sara Duterte changes her mind and seeks the presidency. Well, hundreds are hoping to land a chance to run for the top national posts and lead the country in 2022. While there are big familiar names, there are neophytes offering a different brand of leadership, but they might not make the cut. Our Melissa Lopez returns to tell us why.
Binigyan po ako ni God ng message. Position yourself in government that can change laws. Align these laws to my 10 commandments plus 2.
Pinautang ako ng Russian Consortium ng 740 billion euro. Ititrade lang natin ng 200% per month. Wala ng Pilipinong maghirap. Bukas kuryente, 12,000 volts, automatic, wala ka ng COVID.
Neophytes in politics face a great disadvantage as they hope to lead the country for the next 6 years. Apart from having no campaign machinery, it's even harder for little-known aspirants to get their names on the ballot. Of the nearly 100 presidential aspirants and over 100 senatorial hopefuls, many are expected to be declared nuisance bets and will be dropped from the final list by December. It doesn't take much to qualify as a contender for the country's top elective posts based on the Constitution. One must be a natural-born Filipino living in the country, a registered voter, and able to read and write. The age requirement varies per post. In that sense, all those who file their certificates of candidacies are qualified. Each have their own reasons for running.
Hirap na po kami. Ang tataas ng bilihin. Hindi ko po alam kung paanong gagawin.
Housing sa lahat at maiwasan na yung palalayasin at maninirahan sa daan at sa tabing ilog. To please help us in bringing the Philippine heritage wealth for every Filipino. And we are determined to do that.
But not all will move forward.
Magkakaroon ng evaluation ng mga kandidato. Tingnan natin kung sino yung mga merong legitimate intention to run for office at sino yung mga tumatakbo lamang just because. There are candidates who run to make mockery of the system, and there are some candidates who run to cause confusion among voters dahil may kakapareho ng pangalan. And those will be weeded out, no?
Among the aspirants, 3 Marcoses are running for president: Tiburcio, Maria Aurora, and Bongbong. 2 Jinggoys are in the Senate race: former Senator Estrada and Nahar Salih. COMELEC will screen applicants based on their personal and political backgrounds. Former Commissioner Louis Guia says that includes how the aspirants acted when they filed their COCs.
Hindi naman kailangan may pera yung kandidato eh. Meron kang organization, may network of supporters ka who can help you.
Guia says having too many names in the ballot will be a disservice to millions of voters too. In 2016, only 6 of 130 presidential hopefuls made it to the ballot. Until then, these aspiring leaders will have to wait and hope for the best. Melissa Lopez, CNN Philippines.
Coming up on Newsnight, Nobel Peace Prize recipient journalist Maria Ressa talks about the social media algorithm and how it can fail to separate lies from facts. Details when we return.
Anyari sa'yo? Ba't nakasimangot ka? Alam ko na. Masakit ang katawan mo, no? Sa sobrang trabaho? O di kaya masakit ang ulo sa sobrang stress? Break ka muna. Hinga ng malalim at imasahe ang ulo mo gamit ang Herbalaya Liniment Oil. Ako rin ganun eh. Kaya pag mataas ang tensyon sa trabaho, mag-Herbalaya break ka muna.
Herbalaya Liniment Oil. Amoy na kaaya-aya. Sa bawat pahid ay ginhawa.
Kumagaan ang inuman pag sunbigla. Oy, musta?
Ako, stressed sa work, kaya ini-imagine kong nasa beach ako.
Tapos ng mabigat na araw, mag-inuman with friends and sunbigla. Ulitin natin to. Ang alin? Imagine? Hindi, mag-inuman.
You're watching Newsnight. I'm Pia Ontiveros. The Philippines topped We Are Social and Hootsuite's annual report on social media usage for the 6th year in a row. But Nobel Peace Prize 2021 winner Maria Ressa warns of the dangers of using these online platforms for news. The Rappler CEO was recently awarded the prestigious honor for defending freedom of information. However, Ressa also acknowledges the problem between social media and widespread misinformation, saying the algorithm used by Facebook has potential to twist the truth.
It spreads lies laced with anger and hate faster and further than facts. What that does is it divides society and radicalizes if you're a user. So when you say a lie 1,000,000 times, it becomes a fact. When you don't have facts, you can't have truth. When you don't have truth, you can't have trust. If you don't have this, you don't have a shared reality. You can't have democracy. You can't have any kind of meaningful human interaction to solve the existential problems we face, coronavirus or climate change.
Congratulatory messages from a number of local and international personalities are pouring in for Ressa. Now, these include presidential spokesperson Harry Roque, who earlier today said Malacanang is very happy for the victory. Ressa and Rappler's detailed coverage of President Duterte's drug war was previously cited by the Nobel Prize in giving the award, but Roque added that this was not a slap on government, denying that there has ever been any media censorship or a chilling effect among journalists in the country. Catch Maria Ressa on The Final Word later tonight at 9. We still have 75 days before Christmas Day, and that is it for now. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again at 7 on News.ph. I'm Pia Ontiveros for Newsnight, where we go above and beyond the headlines.
This program is brought to you by...
Anyari sa'yo? Ba't nakasimangot ka? Alam ko na. Masakit ang katawan mo, no? Sa sobrang trabaho? O di kaya masakit ang ulo sa sobrang stress? Break ka muna. Hinga ng malalim at imasahe ang ulo mo gamit ang Herbalaya Liniment Oil. Ako rin ganun eh. Kaya pag mataas ang tensyon sa trabaho, mag-Herbalaya break ka muna.
Herbalaya Liniment Oil. Amoy na kaaya-aya. Sa bawat pahid ay ginhawa.
RPN Radio Philippines Network. Radyo Ronda DXKT Davao. Member, kapisanan ng mga broadcaster ng Pilipinas.
Diabetes is a growing problem here at home, with almost 4 million Filipinos living with the disease. But awareness and better management of its complications can help them live healthier as well as happier. One of the complications is diabetic retinopathy. It happens when high blood sugar levels lead to damage in the eyes, and it typically causes mild vision problems at first, but it could eventually lead to blindness if not managed properly. On the program today, we'll talk more about diabetic retinopathy, its symptoms, types, prevention, as well as treatment. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and welcome to MedTalk Health Talk on CNN Philippines. One in 3 people living with diabetes have some degree of diabetic retinopathy, and every other diabetic and even pre-diabetics are at risk of developing this. Taking active steps to manage it as early as now can help prevent complications and improve your overall health. So let's welcome our guests for today. With us is Dr. Ricardo Papa. He's an ophthalmologist and the Vice President of the Vitreoretina Society of the Philippines. We're also joined by Dr. Lizette Lopez, who's an internal medicine specialist from the UST Hospital. I'll start the discussion with Dr. Rob. Let's talk about what happens when someone has diabetic retinopathy.
People with diabetic retinopathy, there hardly are any symptoms. So that is actually the dangerous part, because the patients, they think everything's going fine, and then later on when they start to develop the complications of diabetic retinopathy, that's when they start coming in, and by that time sometimes it's very difficult to reverse the changes that have happened. So that's why our advocacy is to screen early, to catch it early, and to treat it early, and prevent the complications of diabetic retinopathy.
Dr. Lizette, how does someone develop diabetes? Let's explain that to our viewers.
Diabetes, it's a complicated disease in a way. So what happens is there is 2 insults. Generally, there's a genetic component, but not always required. And then we have the lifestyle part, which a lot of people are familiar with, wherein if we have the poor diet in terms of higher sugar intake, the chocolate, ice cream, and all of that, as well as the carbs. So in Asia, especially in the Philippines, we like our carbohydrates. We have it in our drinks, we have it in our rice, we have it in our everything, in the food, and the desserts, and everything else. That is a big factor as to why there is a high prevalence of diabetes in our country.
Dr. Rob mentioned that during the initial phases, the symptoms are very mild or hardly any symptoms at all. But are there any red flags, Dr. Rob, that our viewers, especially our viewers with diabetes, should watch out for?
They can have perfect vision, but there are changes already happening. So if you do get symptoms, these symptoms can be very mild. You can have blurring of vision, slight waviness of vision. You can have floaters. Floaters are these black spots floating in the field of vision. So any small changes like that, but they are non-specific, meaning these changes or these symptoms aren't specific to diabetic retinopathy. They can indicate any sort of retina condition in the eye. So when they see those, they should immediately go to their ophthalmologist.
Dr. Rob, what other factors aside from having diabetes can contribute to having a more severe form of diabetic retinopathy?
When we have diabetic patients, we always tell them, I always tell them, you have to go to your cardiologist or endocrinologist. You have to manage, aside from your diabetes, aside from managing the blood sugar, you have to manage your blood pressure, you have to manage your cholesterol levels, because it's been proven that if these are elevated, the progression of retinopathy will also be faster.
Now, Dr. Lizette, we have generally 2 types of diabetes, either type 1 or type 2. Now, for diabetic retinopathy, are both of these, either type 1 or type 2, people at risk of developing diabetic retinopathy?
It has to do with the pathophysiology, or the cause of the diabetic retinopathy is because of the high sugar. So whether they have type 1 or type 2 diabetes, then they can have diabetic retinopathy. For type 1 patients, we generally tell them to get the screening or to get their eyes checked with the ophthalmologist 5 years after the initial diagnosis of type 1 diabetes, because it presents immediately. So So people would go to the hospital once they have the symptoms, and that's soon after the disease starts. For type 2 diabetes, because generally people may have it for a while, for years, without really feeling it or without knowing that they have diabetes. So the moment it's diagnosed, we tell them to get screened for diabetic retinopathy already.
The longer a person has diabetes, the more likely they'll develop diabetic retinopathy. Dr. Rob, there are actually two types of diabetic retinopathy. Could you explain this to our viewers?
There is the non-proliferative type, which is the earlier type of diabetic retinopathy, meaning a lot of times these patients will not have any symptoms at all. And then there is the more serious type, which is the proliferative type of diabetic retinopathy. And this is the type wherein the patient will start to develop new vessels and is at risk for developing hemorrhage. So meaning immediate, there will be blurring of vision, sometimes blinding vision, and a lot of times these patients will sometimes need surgery for management later on.
How can someone prevent this? Because that's what we want to achieve here. We don't want it to reach the severe type or even the proliferative type. So what's your advice to our viewers?
Screening is the most important thing. A number of times I do get patients who have been diabetic for a long time and they don't know that they have to have their eyes checked. We do get a lot of those patients who already have the complications of diabetic retinopathy, and they haven't had any eye exam at all. So aside from the screening, they do need to control those risk factors like your blood sugar, the blood pressure, and cholesterol, as mentioned earlier.
Now, if proliferative diabetic retinopathy is left untreated, it can lead to serious complications, and we'll talk about what these are when we return. Stay with us on MedTalk Health Talk, your partner in healthcare. This is CNN Philippines.
Oh, anyari sa'yo? Ba't nakasimangot ka? Alam ko na. Masakit ang katawan mo, ano? Sa sobrang trabaho? O di kaya masakit ang ulo sa sobrang stress? Break ka muna. Hinga ng malalim at imasahe ang ulo mo gamit ang Herbalaya Liniment Oil. Ako rin ganun eh. Kaya pag mataas ang tensyon sa trabaho, mag-Herbalaya break ka muna.
Herbalaya Liniment Oil. Amoy na kaaya-aya. Sa bawat pahid ay ginhawa.
I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez and welcome back to MedTalk Health Talk. When you're living with diabetes, complications may develop over time. For one, diabetic retinopathy is a potentially blinding eye complication, and early detection, as in most diseases, is key. Now, Dr. Liz, going back to diabetes, aside from this diabetic retinopathy, which of course we want to prevent, there are other complications in other parts of the body which diabetes can actually do. What are some of the more severe cases if diabetes is left untreated?
So we have the complications for the microvascular disease, and that's the eye, so the retinopathy, which we're talking about now. We also have, which most people are familiar with, for the nephropathy, or those who will require eventually dialysis if it's not treated. So the kidneys are affected. And then we have the nerves, and that's actually very common as well. A lot of our patients say tusok or some numbness or thickening of their hands and feet, and that's the neuropathy. What most people are not aware of is that even the nerves for the internal organs are affected. So there's the problems with the heart, wherein the blood pressure may fluctuate. There's also problems with constipation, with prolonged food in the stomach. For the more severe complications, we have the amputation because of problems in the big vessels going towards the feet. And therefore, there's also the problem with poor wound healing. And then, of course, we have the strokes and the heart attacks, because there are problems already with the blood vessels in the heart or the blood vessels going towards the brain.
Going back to Dr. Rob. Dr. Rob, so it can be hand in hand. Someone with diabetes can not only have diabetic retinopathy, but other factors in their body as well. But focusing on the extreme side of diabetic retinopathy, you talked about some hemorrhages. What will the patient feel kapag malala na yung kanyang diabetic retinopathy?
The main thing is really blurring of vision. So you can get macular edema, and then you can also get vitreous hemorrhage and something known as tractional retinal detachment. So a lot of the symptoms there are basically blurring of vision. If you get blood in your vitreous area, so the vitreous is this gel which is normally clear, and when that fills up with blood, it will cover your view. So the doctor cannot see inside to check the retina. The patient can't see out of his eye to see anything else.
Dr. Rob, many people might be asking if they reach this point and they do lose their vision because of those factors, which one here are reversible and which ones are permanent?
Both are reversible. So when you have macular edema, there are various treatments that we can give. You can give injections of a medication. You can give laser. For vitreous hemorrhage, you can do surgery if it's not clearing after a certain period of time. When you talk about being reversible, sometimes if the macular edema is there for such a long period of time, it's very difficult to reverse. And that's what I was referring to earlier when I said that prevention is always better than cure, because when you get these changes, it's very hard to reverse the changes. So we can clear the blood, but if there's damage that happens to the macular area, it's very hard to bring the patient back to his normal 20/20 vision. So again, if you're watching, please get yourself screened if you haven't already.
Dr. Rob, I'd like to also talk about a very common eye condition that a lot of our viewers know about, and that is glaucoma. Could you talk about the link between glaucoma and diabetic retinopathy?
So glaucoma is a condition wherein the optic nerve of the eye is affected. It's caused by a series of changes in the eye, and most common of which is the rise in intraocular pressure. So the eye has a certain pressure level, and if it rises beyond the normal levels, the optic nerve becomes choked, blood cannot flow very well to the optic nerve, and eventually it dies. So the link between diabetes and glaucoma, it's usually the end stage. So when you have a lot of proliferation of these new vessels, they will block the angles in the eye.
Dr. Liz, I'd like to go back to diabetes ulit para doon sa mga hindi aware, because it's very easy to not know na diabetic ka na pala or pre-diabetic ang isang tao. What's the best test for someone to undertake to know their glucose status?
It should be, the screening is for the fasting blood sugar, so that's an 8-hour fast with no fluids and nothing, no food, of course. And then also an HbA1c, although we have to make sure it's a good quality HbA1c, because there are a lot of laboratories which may not have the best quality HbA1c.
Okay.
The fasting blood sugar for normal is less than 100. For 100 to 125 is the impaired fasting glucose or yung papuntang diabetes. And then 126 and above is diabetes. And for the HbA1c, it is less than 5.7% for normal. And then pre-diabetes is 5.7 to 6.4%, above 6.5% and above is diabetes.
Dr. Rob, let's talk about screening now for diabetic retinopathy. Explain to our viewers what this entails. A lot of our viewers would like to know, is this painful? Is this tolerable? Tell them how it goes.
When you have an appointment with your ophthalmologist, they will do the basic examination. They'll take they'll check your vision, check your refraction, check the pressure of the eye. And one of the final examinations that they do is they dilate the pupil. So the pupil is this black hole in the middle of your iris. So normally it's small, it's about 2 to 3 millimeters. So we will place drops in the eye to dilate it to about 8 to 9 millimeters. And this allows us to see the back part of the eye, which is the retina. So it's not painful, but you will get a lot of glare when you go out. So we tell patients that you will have a hard time reading near objects because you cannot accommodate. And 2, you will have difficulty if there's bright light out. So you will have a lot of glare. So wearing of shades will help out. But definitely it's not painful.
When it comes to these screening tests, where should our viewers go for the most accurate results?
Any ophthalmologist should be able to do that. If you tell them that you are a diabetic and you want to have your retina checked, or even if you just tell them that you're a diabetic, most of them should know enough to do a retina exam. So some of these major hospitals, they will take a photo of your retina, and this, once it gets read, it will indicate there if you do have changes from diabetes or not.
Apart from regular screening, managing diabetes is an effective way to prevent diabetic retinopathy. We'll talk about the best practices when we return. We want to be your partner for a lifetime of good health, so stay with us here on CNN Philippines.
O, anyari sa'yo? Ba't nakasimangot ka? Alam ko na. Masakit ang katawan mo, ano? Sa sobrang trabaho? O di kaya masakit ang ulo sa sobrang stress? Break ka muna. Hinga ng malalim at imasahe ang ulo mo gamit ang Herbalaya Liniment Oil. Ako rin ganun eh. Kaya pag mataas ang tensyon sa trabaho, mag-Herbalaya break ka muna.
Herbalaya Liniment Oil. Amoy na kaaya-aya. Sa bawat pahid ay ginhawa.
One of the more common complications of diabetes is diabetic retinopathy. Today, we're talking about how to avoid, manage, and treat this condition. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and this is MedTalk Health Talk, where your health always comes first. Sometimes, diabetic retinopathy can't be prevented. Symptoms often don't appear until the condition progresses. And we mentioned that regular screening is key in preventing severe vision loss. But a healthy lifestyle needs to come hand in hand. Dr. Liz, can you share with our viewers some of the best practices in managing someone's blood glucose and trying to keep it in that very healthy range?
Always the diet and the exercise still, so aside from the medication. Actually, I tell patients the most important part of the management is diet. So if they don't eat properly, then what happens is the medications will either not work very well or you just keep going up on them and then they end up on insulin. So the diet part is so generally that eat more vegetables first, non-starchy vegetables, right? So the more of the leafy ones and yung ampalaya and things like that for half of the plate. And then 1/4 of the plate is the just the carbohydrate, and that includes the starchy vegetables. And then we have the proteins at 1/4 of the plate. And the drinks, that's what we should really tell patients, like avoid all sugary drinks as much as possible. Okay. Then we have the exercise or the lifestyle part. And the general rule is, so moderate intensity exercise. It used to be 150 minutes per week. So that's around 2.5 hours a week, split up like every 2 to 3 days. However, what happens is that these days, because of the pandemic and people are unable to go out, the guidelines have increased to 200 minutes of moderate intensity exercise. High intensity exercise is 75 minutes per week, and that's if they can't even talk, or they can barely talk or just in phrases. So that's they really should have that sort of activity.
Now, Dr. Rob, I'd like to go to treatment when it comes to diabetic retinopathy. Let's start first with the non-proliferative type. What is the general treatment for this?
So for non-proliferative, it's basically observation. We tell the patient, the most important thing you can do is go regularly to your endocrinologist because we need you to control all those risk factors, the blood sugar, the blood pressure, the cholesterol, and they usually just follow up with us once a year if there are none or there's no retinopathy, or if there's mild retinopathy. If the retinopathy is around moderate, then maybe we see them every 5 to 6 months. So if it's not that severe, it's just observation.
Now, what's the prognosis for these types of procedures, Dr. Rob? How likely are they to regain their vision if they indeed have lost a certain percentage of it?
So the prognosis is usually dependent on how affected the macula is. So it can range from anywhere from 50% lower to 100%, especially in those cases where the macula is not affected at all. So if you have traction, when you say traction detachment, when you have proliferation, when you have blood, eventually the blood settles down, it forms membranes over the retina. The membranes can pull, and from being an attached retina, it gets pulled and it becomes detached. So if the macula is detached, the prognosis is guarded, meaning we don't know if the vision will return even if we put the macula back in place. So the patient should be wary if the macula is affected.
Dr. Rob, how often should people or diabetics screen for diabetic retinopathy?
Type 2 diabetics, they should see an ophthalmologist right away. Why? Because we don't know when their diabetes started. It could have started, sometimes they tell me, doctor, I was diagnosed with diabetes yesterday, but when I look into their eye, I already see proliferative retinopathy. And I tell them, your diabetes has probably been in there for about 3 to 5 years. So immediately when they are diagnosed as diabetics, they should see an ophthalmologist right away.
Thank you, ophthalmologist Dr. Ricardo Papa and internal medicine specialist Dr. Lizette Lopez for sharing with us your insights. Here on MedTalk Health Talk, we hope to give you the knowledge and care that you need. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and we'll see you again next time. Stay safe, everyone.
O, anyari sa'yo? Ba't nakasimangot ka? Alam ko na. Masakit ang katawan mo, ano? Sa sobrang trabaho? O di kaya masakit ang ulo sa sobrang stress? Break ka muna. Hinga ng malalim at imasahe ang ulo mo gamit ang Herbalaya Liniment Oil. Ako rin ganun eh. Kaya pag mataas ang tensyon sa trabaho, mag-Herbalaya break ka muna.
Herbalaya Liniment Oil. Amoy na kaaya-aya. Sa bawat pahid ay ginhawa.